So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at Greek culture. And, mainly this is what people think of when they learn about or hear about Greek civilization, and in some cases, Western civilization. So we begin with religion. Now, the pantheon of Greek gods is said to live on a grand palace at the peak of Mount Olympus in the northern part of Greece. And you can see Mount Olympus in the background of the image. And there would be the peak of Mount Olympus. And the concept of Olympus itself does predate the Greeks, although the poet Homer acknowledges the mountain as home of the gods when he wrote about the Iliad and the Odyssey. The gods themselves, not perfect, but they're meant to represent the emotions, principles, and skills of humans. Now at the head, you have Zeus. When Zeus ultimately defeated his father Cronus in a great battle with people or deities called the Titans, Zeus claimed supremacy over the sky. His brother Poseidon gained control over the ocean, and Hades was given the underworld. Religion for the Greeks is really less about morality and theology, and it's more about keeping on the good side of the gods and really trying to figure out what their intentions are. Sacrificing animals, very common. And consulting soothsayers and holding festivals in honor of the gods, also very common. You see a lot of temple shrines and caves that are going to be popping up for these deities. And on the subject of religion and ritual, we have the oracle at Delphi. And Delphi was a challenging place to get to, but it was the leading home, or I should say home to the leading oracle in the classical world. And there were at least 8 total oracles on the Greek mainland, but, Apollo, oracle at Delphi, that's the most prominent. The god Apollo, supposedly he lives there, 9 months of the year, and the oracle's available for consultation on one day of each of these months. So it's kind of a limited window, but this is something people really want to utilize. Temple itself is managed by an elderly priest, and a local woman would serve as the prophetess. Now you ask the oracle a question, she goes into a trance, and the advice she gives, pretty vague, and you can interpret it however you want. So again, this really speaks to the importance of rituals, as the oracle was often consulted by city-states prior to decisions about war or other matters of state. And this oracle at Delphi, 1,000 years it's in operation. So for 1,000 years, states and people consulted the oracle. Now in the northwestern portion of the Peloponnese, a grove sacred to Zeus stood near the city of Olympia. And in the summer of 756 BC, a series of athletic contests were held to honor Zeus. Every 4 years thereafter, they were held again. So to ensure that athletes and spectators could safely reach the games, a truce was actually declared. Those sending out the message of the truce would, give an announcement of the truce, but also send out the date of the games. So things like waging war, entering into legal disputes, not allowed. Not allowed for any city-states that are going to take part in the games. Women aren't allowed to attend or compete, although they do have their own games to honor the goddess Hera. And the games will last 5 days, variety of events. But if you win, you're a hero for life. I mean, you're a bona fide celebrity. So these games really stress the dual importance the Greeks place on physical fitness and a so-called ideal body type, but also on these rituals designed to honor the gods. So that's the religious side of things. When we look at gender roles, to most Greeks, such as the Athenians, women not to be trusted and needed to be kept under strict control. They can manage the household, but that's kind of it. Marriages are arranged, and they serve the purpose of enhancing a family's standing or perhaps acquiring property. Now, married women, if they leave, are generally accompanied by servants or slaves. Their job is to make clothing and, again, take care of the house. Really, the only time women are allowed out to mingle are religious festivals. And even weddings themselves, they're very informal. No priests, the state isn't involved. Evidence indicates they usually took place in the wintertime. Now, Spartan women are the exception. Spartan women are expected to be physically active, and they're provided with ample opportunities to maintain said fitness level. Their main purpose in life is viewed to be motherhood. So the theory is that healthy men and healthy women are going to produce strong and healthy offspring that will serve the state. Makeup, long hair, earrings, all of that's forbidden. And, not a lot of clothing, just like with the men. However, women can speak freely, and they can speak directly. Especially since men are frequently away on campaign, Spartan women are really afforded a pretty high degree of autonomy when compared to their other Greek counterparts. So gender norms usually fall along strict stereotypical lines. Now, when we look at the achievements of the Greeks, we start with the physical. They left behind a lot of monuments that attest to their greatness. Most prominent being the one you see on screen, the Parthenon, which houses a bronze statue, a 30-foot high bronze statue of Athena, the namesake of Athens. And it stands at the top of the Acropolis. The Parthenon was completed about 7 years later. Now, we've got a variety of materials going on here. We have marble, gold, ivory, and bronze. And you have skilled workers like carpenters, coppersmiths, masons, and gravers. These men are used not only to complete the Parthenon, but dozens of construction projects that are undertaken over the next 2 decades. And it's not just Athens, but Attica in and of itself that's trying to glorify itself. You also have things such as new concert halls and gymnasiums that are being constructed. And it really emphasizes the transition of Athens into a cultural powerhouse. And it continues, that belief of the ideal body type and quote-unquote physical perfection. So, in terms of achievement, we have the physical. Then we have the cultural. This is an era when theater begins to rise in Athenian society. So our notions of tragedy and comedy come from this time frame. Tragedy was first designed as a state-sponsored contest, and prizes are awarded for the best, during competition. In its inception, we have 3 actors that are part of a tragedy, and then there's a chorus that dances and advances the narrative. Many tragedies are really meant to embody modern-day Athenians. Now take the one you see on screen. It's called Oedipus Rex. There's usually a hero who had extraordinary power. That hero was humbled, and then something terrible befell that hero. In this case, Oedipus Rex. You have Oedipus, who's the hero of the story. He becomes king of Thebes by killing his father and marrying his mother. Both things which were foretold in prophecies, but he was unaware of both of them when he did them. A great pollution befalls the city and is traced back to Oedipus. So to rid the pollution from Thebes, he gouges his eyes out and is expelled from the city to save it. Now this was written by Sophocles, and it was first performed at the height of the plague of Athens, proving that culture is always reflective of its time frame. Now the flip side, you have comedy. The concept of comedy really begins to arise in the 400s BC and really evolved from a profane satire of democracy into more softer comedies, laced with innuendos. Then it became more optimistic humor that focused on individuals instead of politics. But from the start, comedy has often poked fun at politicians, often with them seated in the audience. So there's a clear line you can trace from the inception of comedy to the current political humor of today. And comedy was starting to be viewed as a more modern form of entertainment, while older tragedies are already seen as classics. So that's what we have in terms of achievement. Now, why should we care? What else did they give us? Did they give civilization that we have to work with? Now, the word history in and of itself is a Greek word, and it translates to inquiry, asking questions. Now, this is appropriate since Herodotus is often referred to as the father of history. Now, Herodotus was an extensive traveler, and his goal was to interview participants and witnesses to major events, record their stories and perceptions, and figure out what happened. Now, in Athens and other Greek city-states, he gave public readings of these accounts, and became friends with the poet Sophocles, who convinced him to transform his book into a history of the Persian Wars. Much of what we perceive to know about the Persian Wars comes from his writings, and they're not always accurate, but he introduces the descriptive method of viewing history, where you use the experiences of others to comprehend events. Now, a historian named Thucydides participated in the Peloponnesian Wars, and he personally survived the plague of Athens. Very little is known about his life, but we know he was elected general in 424 BC, was defeated in battle, and was exiled for 2 decades. And during this time, he wrote his history of the Peloponnesian Wars, which is more explanatory. So you're either descriptive in using the experiences of others to understand events, or you simply understand the events for their own sake. Cause, effect. These are kind of our 2 main methods that we have for understanding history. Now, mathematically speaking, Euclid is referred to as the father of geometry, and he was active in Alexandria in the early 300s and late 200s BC. Many of his contributions were published in what was called Elements, and although many elements of his work were actually already well known, he was the first to take them and organize them into a simple, easy-to-understand framework. Now, Pythagoras, who you see on screen, is credited with the theorem that bears his name, although the equation was well known to Babylonians and Indians centuries prior to this. This means that Pythagoras is the one who most likely introduced it to Greek culture, and it was said that he promptly sacrificed an ox after, discovering this theorem, proving the strict respect for tradition and ritual that the Greeks had. If you're more scientifically inclined, we have Archimedes, who was from Syracuse and absolutely brilliant. Among his many contributions, he was the one who discovered that the greater the density of an object, the greater the displacement would be. And he discovered this while he was in the bath, and he was so excited that he screamed, "Eureka!" and just ran naked through the streets. Eureka translating to "I have found it." Now, much of his other contributions were in the name of war, because he lived during the Punic Wars and the rise of the Roman Republic. His Archimedes screw was designed for a naval warship, and his lever allowed sailors to lift items that would otherwise be too heavy. Now, the 2 accounts of his death demonstrate the rising power of Rome. Roman forces captured the island of Syracuse after a 2-year siege, and he was working on a mathematical diagram when he was told to go and meet the general. He refused because he needed to finish the problem he was working on, and was killed. There's another story that suggests he was carrying mathematical objects and was killed because a Roman soldier thought they were valuable items. Now, whichever one is true, we do know that the Roman general was irate because he wanted Archimedes taken alive due to his knowledge. But this also demonstrates the rising power of Rome, while you see the Greeks making great cultural achievements. And finally, if you're entering the medical field, you owe much to Hippocrates. He's referred to as the father of medicine because he recognizes medical science as a field that's distinct and unique from other fields like philosophy. Now, Hippocrates is one of the first to ascertain that diseases occur naturally and are not attributed to superstition or the gods. He was considered influential and sacred, to the point that no advancements were made for centuries that deviated from his methods. Now, he's known for his professional manner, and he insisted that observations should be documented in a clear way so they could be passed down to others. He was also the first to categorize illnesses into the categories of acute, chronic, endemic, and epidemic. Now, the oath, the Hippocratic Oath, which may or may not have been his doing, is still taken today for those who pledge to use their medical knowledge to only use it for good.